So did the Bible just fall from the sky? So there's some people who will assert that Christians believe that the Bible is just this book that kind of like fell out of the sky and there's no evidence to prove that this book is indeed from God. So the main character of the Bible is Jesus of Nazareth. You see Jesus prophesied about in the first book of the Bible in Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. And then the whole biblical narrative is leading us to Jesus. You have prophecies made about Jesus throughout the entirety of the Old Testament. And then you arrive to Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four gospel accounts, two of those accounts being eyewitness accounts, both Matthew and John, and then Mark getting his information from an eyewitness, Peter, about Jesus. And then you go to the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, where you have Jesus coming back in judgment, where he is Lord and he is King. So the whole book from cover to cover points us to Jesus Christ. So this Jesus, the amount of historical testimony that we have for this Jesus is unmatched in any figure of antiquity, any historical person that you can think of. So when you look at Jesus and you look at the writings about Jesus, so for example, the four gospel accounts, Matthew's account and John's account would have been eyewitness accounts because John was a man who spent much time with Jesus. Once Jesus started his earthly ministry, John was there with him. John was permitted by Jesus to see him transfigured on the Mount of Transfiguration. John was the one who laid his head on Jesus's chest at the Last Supper. John was one of the first disciples to see the empty tomb of Jesus. And you have this gospel account written by John, attributed to John, and you can go back and look throughout history and you will see that the earliest tradition is that this indeed was written by the Apostle John, who was an eyewitness of Jesus Christ. And then you have even people who would have been disciples of John that we would call the early church fathers that wrote extensively about Jesus. You have this man by the name of Polycarp, where he's found in some of the documents of the early church. These are not found. These are not documents that are found in the scriptures, but documents what we would call extra biblical documents about this man just willingly dying for the cause of Christ because he learned about Jesus through the teaching of the apostles. So you have all this going on, and then friends, there are so many documents written by people that we would call the early church fathers about Jesus. I mean, it's impossible to name all the names in just one video. I would assume there's upwards of hundreds of them if I were just making a guesstimation. But then you have hostile quotes about Jesus. You have quotes from people like Josephus, who was a Jew who did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. He writes about Jesus. You have Tacitus, the first century Roman historian. He writes about Jesus. He writes about the darkness that was happening when Jesus was being crucified. You have hostile quotes from the Talmud. I believe it's a second century quote where they asserted that Jesus got his miraculous powers from going to Egypt and learning magic. And then coming back, they claim in this quote, he was elated with powers claiming to be a god. But within that quote, they make the assertion that Jesus indeed had miraculous powers. And this quote was from around the second century. You have a quote from a Chinese emperor that dates from like 31 or 33 AD. No idea how a Chinese emperor would have gotten the information that quickly. But this is what is dated. And he talks about the darkness over the land during the crucifixion. He says the sins of the people are now on one man. Pardon is proclaimed to all under heaven. You have another Chinese emperor or military general, one of the two, who paused all military activity for 5 days after learning about the crucifixion of the Messiah. And you just have the quote after quote, document after document referencing the historical Jesus. And what's amazing about that is that these quotes all corroborate and confirm the details that you find in the gospel accounts, the details of Jesus' life. He's a Jewish man that spent much of his time around Palestine. He was crucified at the hands of Pontius Pilate. He had disciples. His popularity was spreading. His teaching, his death, his reported resurrection. All these things you can amass from extra biblical documents. In fact, you could you could preserve the New Testament. 97%, I believe, is what people estimate of the New Testament. If you just had the writings of the church fathers and nothing else, not the New Testament, just the writings of the church fathers. And they all wrote about Jesus. Friends, the amount of documented evidence about Jesus, both friendly and hostile, is out of this world, literally. There's no figure in antiquity that has this amount of textual evidence to back up their existence. Now, how does that get me to my original point? Well, it's Jesus. He died, but he also resurrected from the dead. A document in called 1 Corinthians, which was written by the hand of the Apostle Paul, written around 53 to 54 AD, talks about how Jesus resurrected from the dead, and historically he appeared to all these people and even appeared to more than 500 people at one time. And he says, most whom are still alive. So at that time, you could have asked the people, did you see the resurrected Jesus? So the main character of the Bible, Jesus, resurrected from the dead, and he never died again. Bodily resurrection. If the Jews or the Romans wanted to put a stop to Christianity, go to the tomb and show people the body, prove that they're lying. We know nobody did that because Christianity took off. It took off, unlike any other religion or ideology. The historicity behind the Christ is undeniable, okay? So he's the main character of Scripture. He resurrected from the dead. He is Lord. He is Christ. And he is King. And he